The BBC's chair quits after a damning investigation. Richard Sharp resigns because he didn't disclose his role in securing an £800,000 loan for the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson.
As we see time and time again with this Conservative government, after 13 years, they're more interested in saving the skin of their friends, whether it's Dominic Raab or Richard Sharp, than they are doing the right thing.
Also this lunchtime, thousands of NHS workers to strike after they reject the latest pay offer from the government.
So as charming as you are, Mr. Bond, I will be keeping my eye on our government's money.
Triumph for Bond star Ava Green. She wins her legal battle against a production company and...
So good night. Thanks for watching. That's our show.
James Corden signs off from his US talk show with a little help from some pretty big names.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good afternoon. The chair of the BBC has been forced to resign after an investigation found he failed to declare his role in arranging an £800,000 loan for the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. A damning report found there was a potential perceived conflict of interest which wasn't disclosed by Richard Sharp during his application and interview for the role. Mr Sharp insisted today this was inadvertent and not material. With the latest, here's our political correspondent Libby Vina.
An organisation that prides itself on its independence and impartiality, today reeling from the resignation of its chairman over having too close a relationship with government.
Did Mr Sharp help you with your loan?
Richard Sharp quit over his dealings with Boris Johnson and his failure to be frank about them. A report by Adam Heppenstall, KC, found there is a risk of a perception that Mr Sharp was recommended for appointment because he assisted the former Prime Minister in a private financial matter. They might also perceive that he was putting himself in a position where he might, if appointed, be beholden to the Prime Minister for his support, such that his independence from government was compromised.
I've always maintained the breach was inadvertent. Nevertheless, I have decided that it is right to prioritise the interest of the BBC. I feel that this matter may well be a distraction from the corporation's good work were I to remain in post until the end of my term. I have, therefore, this morning, resigned as the BBC chair.
So what exactly happened? In September 2020, Richard Sharp is contacted by his friend Sam Blythe, a cousin of Boris Johnson's, who says he wants to help him with his financial difficulties. In November, Mr Sharp applies to be chairman of the BBC, having already discussed it with Mr Johnson. Later that month, Mr Blythe asks Mr Sharp to arrange a meeting with the Cabinet Secretary Simon Case. In December, Mr Sharp meets Mr Case to discuss the request. In January 2021, Mr Sharp becomes the government's preferred candidate. But in a pre-appointment hearing, MPs are not told about his help in arranging an £800,000 loan guarantee for Mr Johnson from Mr Blythe.
He should have been sacked weeks ago. It was clear for everyone to see that he had failed to act appropriately in the process, and it has caused untold damage to the reputation and the independence of the BBC.
So why didn't the Prime Minister, who himself once worked for Richard Sharp when he was a banker, act sooner?
It's right that there is a proper process, an independent process, that we don't prejudge. We allow it to carry on, establish the facts of what happened, reach a conclusion. That's happened. Richard Sharp has resigned, but it's right that we do these things properly.
One former BBC executive said Mr Sharp was right to quit.
He showed a lack of transparency and arguably a lack of integrity in failing to declare what is clearly a conflict of interest in having willingly or otherwise helped out the Prime Minister at the time the Prime Minister was being asked to appoint him to the job.
There's likely to be a debate now about how exactly the BBC chair is selected in future. Libby Vina, ITV News.
Let's go to our Deputy Political Editor, Anushka Astana, who's at Westminster for us. It's lunchtime. Anushka, calls today to reform how such appointments are made.
Yeah, I mean, this perception of cronyism is definitely having an effect on trust, and that is a problem for the BBC. And it's not just the BBC, actually. This is about the appointment system for public bodies. There are more than 300 of them, according to the Institute for Government. They spend something like £200 billion of public money. We've had controversies now over the BBC, but previously over Ofcom, and also when it comes to the Charity Commission. Now, the reason that ministers are involved in this process is because of the amount of money they're spending. It's about public accountability, about democratic accountability, but big questions today about really how political the role should be when it comes to the BBC, which is meant to be an impartial organisation. We've heard complaints from within the BBC. Gary Lineker, one of its biggest stars, tweeting very clearly what he thinks today, that the BBC chair should not be selected by the government of the day, not now, not ever. There's also been questions about the panel itself and the people on it. It turned out there was a Conservative donor actually on the panel that recommended various figures for this role in the first place. So yeah, big questions, and people asking, should this be a political appointment at all?
Anushka, what about Boris Johnson's role in all of this?
Well, it is more controversy involving his time in government. You know, it's hard to believe that it wasn't that many months ago he looked like he was on the brink of coming back. He had around 100 MPs backing him to be leader again. Since then, we've had the Privileges Committee, which has been very, very uncomfortable with him around Partygate, and now big questions about the decision to appoint a person who was also a close friend but had helped him with this financial situation to such a major role.
OK, Anushka in Westminster, thank you. More than 4,000 NHS workers across England have voted to go on strike. They are members of the Unite union and have rejected the government's pay offer, including a 5% wage rise and one-off payment. They're demanding a pay increase which matches inflation, which is around 10%. Well, I'm joined by Amy Lewis now. So, Amy, talk us through this dispute. Who'll be striking and when?
Well, Unite represents some ambulance workers in England, but they also as well represent some of the lowest paid NHS workers in England, including cleaners and porters. So it is no surprise that they are rejecting this offer. They were expected to do so. Now, what does it mean for strike action? Well, on the 1st of May, members at Guy's and St Thomas will go on strike, and also Yorkshire Ambulance Service. It's important to point out that that coincides with a Royal College of Nursing strike. And then also on Tuesday, on the 2nd, so next week, Unite members in other parts of the country and areas will go on strike, for example, in the Midlands and in the North West. They're not alone in rejecting this offer from the government. Already we've seen Royal College of Nursing members reject it, and also as well, of course, there's that ongoing dispute with the British Medical Association members who are junior doctors. But NHS workers are divided. Midwives and physios earlier this week accepted it, and later today we will hear the outcome of a ballot of GMB members who represent other ambulance workers around England. Now, I've just got off the phone to a Department of Health source who told me the following. They said, "It is disappointing that members of Unite have voted to reject our fair and reasonable pay offer." But that's the point. NHS workers are divided. Some don't believe that this is fair or that it is a reasonable pay offer.
All right, Amy, thank you. British nationals desperate to flee Sudan are being advised to come forward as quickly as possible. It's after rival factions in the country agreed to an extended 3-day ceasefire. Well, airlifted evacuees are continuing to arrive in Cyprus en route to the UK, and they've been describing the terrible conditions in Sudan.
In Sudan, there is no food, no water, no food. Even shops is closed. 2 weeks, shops in closed 2 weeks. No food, no water. In home, no electricity, no water. So there is no life.
It's actually terrifying because since day one, you can hear explosion, gunfires from heavy machineries. You can actually, if you go to the roof of your house, you can see the military planes firing missiles towards the other side of the conflict. The houses around my house actually was destroyed by bombing, bullets. Even kids in my neighborhood was injured by a bullet because of the conflict.
Well, our International Affairs editor, Raghi Omar, is in Djibouti, very close to Sudan. Raghi, we've just heard from some of those lucky enough to make it out, but of course many more haven't.
No, and the extension of the ceasefire by an extra 3 days will help the British authorities to speed up that process in order to get however many Brits remain out of the country. However, I think people should know that when you say a ceasefire, we tend to think of a total cessation of hostilities. That isn't necessarily the case in Sudan. There have been 3 previous ceasefires. All of them have been broken. There is fighting going on. There's sporadic gunfire being heard in the capital, Khartoum. There is evidence of widespread looting in other parts of the country, particularly in the southern state of Darfur. Plumes of smoke continue to rise in cities across Sudan. However, the ceasefire does mean that both warring factions are prepared to at least give a safe passage, as a modicum of safe passage, or the ability of people to be able to get from where they are, British people, to the key airbase outside of Khartoum to meet those RAF flights. And whether all of them get out, we have absolutely no idea. Other people aren't waiting for the flights because it's very expensive to just make the transportation to get you there. We spoke to someone yesterday who said that it cost him $500 for that journey. Others are making it by foot road to Port Sudan and the Egyptian border.
OK, Raggy in Djibouti, thank you. Still to come this lunchtime, why playing sports has become safer, the new concussion guidelines plus. William and Kate pay their respects to those who died in the Aberfan disaster. But first, the Hollywood star Ava Green has won a bitter legal battle against the producers of a film she feared would kill off her career. The sci-fi movie was abandoned, and the French actor, best known for appearing with Daniel Craig in Casino Royale, will now be paid the fee she had agreed. Martha Fairley takes up the story.
I got the impression we were risking millions of dollars and hundreds of lives on a game of luck. What else can you surmise, Mr. Bond?
Ava Green made her name starring alongside Daniel Craig as Vesper Lynd in the Bond film Casino Royale, a performance that won the French actress the BAFTA Rising Star Award. But the collapse of an abandoned sci-fi film about climate change saw her take centre stage at the High Court earlier this year, successfully suing the production company White Lantern Film for her $1 million fee. Mr. Justice Michael Green has ruled she was entitled to the fee, dismissing a counterclaim by White Lantern and its financial backers. Ava Green said justice had prevailed in an Instagram post that read, "In this legal action, I was forced to stand up to a small group of men funded by deep financial resources who tried to use me as a scapegoat to cover up their own mistakes. I am proud that I stood up against their bully boy tactics. They made false allegations about me in public court documents, which the judge has now shown are totally incorrect."
Miss Green to the left!
During the trial in January, White Lantern Films had attempted to portray Green as a diva who made excessive creative and financial demands and had tried to sink the production. But the judge said she didn't renounce her obligations or commit any repudiatory breaches of it.
You were a beautiful boy.
The Hollywood star has described the legal process as a painful and damaging experience, saying it felt like being set upon by hounds. I found myself misrepresented, quoted out of context, and my desire to make the best possible film was made to look like female hysteria. It was cruel and it was untrue. But despite being criticised by the judge as in some senses an unsatisfactory witness, Green will receive her fee worth £810,000. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
Scotland's Lord Advocate has decided the Crown should appeal against the sentence of a rapist who was spared jail earlier this month. 21-year-old Sean Hogg was deemed too young to be sent to prison after raping a 13-year-old girl who was given community service instead. And a far-right extremist who blew up his own kitchen experimenting with explosives has been convicted of terrorism offences. West Midlands police say Vaughan Dolphin from Walsall had a dangerous mindset and was intent on causing harm. Next this lunchtime, why playing sport should become safer. There are now new guidelines for anyone who suffers a head injury, which apply to all sports across the UK. Andrew Misra has the details.
The goal of today's guidance is to change the way head injuries are dealt with in grassroots sport. Sadiq was concussed playing football when he was 16.
I remember clashing into a goalpost, carrying on straight away. You sort of go home and you sort of crack on with your everyday life. And I remember being bedbound for a few days. My mum or my parents not having the knowledge of what a concussion might cause.
While Sadiq's concussion didn't have long-term impacts, Ben Robinson was 14 when he died after being concussed during a school rugby match in 2011. Today's guidance is aimed at preventing similar tragedies in future. The tagline is, "If in doubt, sit them out." It recommends calling the NHS 111 helpline within 24 hours of a potential concussion, to rest and sleep as much as needed for the first 24 to 48 hours, and to avoid using devices like mobile phones and laptops.
It's actually a big step forward because I go to a lot of junior clubs, grassroots level clubs around the country, and people are literally crying out for this understanding of what concussion looks like, what to recognise and what to do about it.
The guidance is welcomed by players and medics, but some say more action is needed.
It should save lives, but we still hear stories of players wanting to stay on, coaches wanting them to stay on, parents wanting to keep the kids on the field. We're trying to get past that message now and say the safest, come off, sit by the sideline, you'll get to play again.
Steps towards changing the culture around dealing with a hidden danger of many grassroots sports. Andrew Mishra, ITV News.
There was a sombre visit by the Prince and Princess of Wales to the site of the Aberfan disaster, where 144 people died, including 116 children. They've been at the Memorial Garden on the site of the school, which was destroyed in the landslide in 1966. Our Wales reporter, Rhys Williams, is there. And Rhys, a really poignant visit today.
Yes, it was, Lucrezia. This was the Prince and Princess of Wales's first visit here to Aberfan and to the Memorial Garden, which, as you say, lies on the site of the old Pantglas Junior School, where so many lives were lost on that dreadful day in 1966. The Prince and Princess of Wales met with survivors of the tragedy, as well as members of the Aberfan Young Wives Club, which was set up after the disaster to support families of the families of those who died here as well. And the Prince and Princess told members of that club that they were deeply moved by what they'd seen today. The village already, of course, has a deep connection with the royal family. The late Queen visited here many times, as did her son as Prince of Wales. And for the new Prince of Wales, there was a feeling today very much of him continuing in the footsteps of not only his father, but his grandmother too.
And Rhys, you mentioned that deep connection. How were the couple received today?
Yeah, there was a really warm welcome here, Lucrezia. Many school children lined the streets, as well as local residents, to welcome the new Prince and Princess of Wales on their first visit here. And there was a lighter moment too, when a baby playfully took the handbag of the Princess of Wales and wouldn't give it back. The Princess did, however, return for her handbag before leaving Aberfan. But as I was saying, Lucrezia, very much a feeling here today of a continuation of a special relationship between the people of Aberfan and the royal family.
All right, Rhys, in Aberfan, thank you. An ancient symbol of Scotland's monarchy has temporarily left Edinburgh Castle for the first time in more than 25 years. The Stone of Destiny is heading to Westminster Abbey to be placed under King Charles's coronation chair. Its first journey to London was in the 13th century when it was stolen by Edward I. It was eventually returned to Scotland 700 years later with an agreement that it could be borrowed for any future coronation. And finally, James Corden has bid farewell to America, signing off from his talk show after 8 years. In the early hours of this morning, he hosted his final Late Late Show ahead of his return to the UK. It was tearful and emotional, and as Sangeeta Kandola reports, he had the help of some very VIP guests.
After more than 8 years at the helm, it was time to exit the stage for British comedian James Corden. This, his last Late Late Show.
so thankful, truly, to each and every one of you who has watched our show night after night. My entire family is here tonight. My mum and dad are here.
James, hi. It's Will Ferrell.
Family and friends, including Harry Styles and Will Ferrell, all signing up for the final sketches.
Shall we meet our first ever guests on the new Late Late Show?
He took a gamble fronting the show back in 2015, but Corden has managed to crack the States, courting hundreds of Hollywood A-listers, amassing millions in the process, alongside many fans, despite sometimes negative headlines about his off-screen antics. But a year ago, he handed in his notice, saying he wanted to come back to the UK to spend more time with his family. But he made sure his American adventure went out with a bang. Last night's show saw him team up with Tom Cruise.
You ready, baby?
For a surprise live performance of The Lion King on Broadway.
Hakuna Matata. Ain't no passing craze. Beep, 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 yeah!
The carpool karaoke segment, arguably the staple of the show, a huge driving force behind its success, saw Adele at the wheel for a final time. And if the stars showing up for his final finale wasn't enough, how about a sign-off from the president?
James, congrats on an incredible run. We'll miss you, pal. I can't wait to see what you do next.
And part of me thinks, why not stay here forever? But deep in my heart, I just know.
In his farewell piano performance, there were cracks in Corden's voice as the curtains closed for the final time, bowing out to a standing ovation. Next stop, the UK. Sangeeta Kandola, ITV News.
And now we're signing off. We are back at 6:30 from everyone on Lunchtime. Bye-bye.